Good evening. Hello to everybody who's joined us on this webinar. My name is Dr. Jane Booth. I mean, there are lots of reasons why you perhaps are interested in social science, but I'm looking at two particular areas that might actually grab your attention. First of all, taking a cursory glance, take a little bit of a look at the news this week. And when I looked at this was on the 16th, a couple of days ago. Apologies to those of you not in the UK currently. This is actually the BBC News website that I picked up a couple of days ago. And these are some of the headlines. Syrian attacks on hospitals, war crimes. PM, Prime Minister of the UK, visits Brussels for crucial EU talks. Taylor Swift wins a Grammy. How much to raise a child? Sheltered housing hit by benefit cuts. Porn site age check plans reviewed. Now they are a wide range of subjects, and they were the top stories, the top 6 stories actually on the BBC News website. And the interesting thing is it cuts across the entire range of social science. The Syrian attacks, obviously, peace studies, politics and history would be able to provide a lot of analysis about why Syria is in the position it is now, and looking at why people in the UK might be interested or need to care about the attacks happening in Syria, not least because of the well-publicised refugee and asylum seeker situation. The Prime Minister visiting Brussels, why do we care about that? Well, certainly in terms of economics, anybody interested in economics will know that whether we stay in the European Union or we pull out of it will have a profound impact on markets both within the UK and across Europe. So economists would be extremely interested in that story. Taylor Swift wins the Grammy. Well, that sounds a bit bizarre. Why would I put that up? Well, certainly in terms of sociology and psychology, music plays a vast part in the formation of identities, particularly for young people. And also, Taylor Swift is a very powerful woman and may well be a role model to a lot of young people out there. And so these are topics which certainly in terms of developmental psychology and sociology and social processes, they would be very, very interested in. How much does it cost to raise a child? This was in the UK. Again, this would cut across sociology and psychology. What the questions we might ask is money enough to raise a child? Aren't there other things like emotions and nurturing that would be important? And social work, the Department of Social Work would be particularly interested in thinking about whether people who, if it does cost, as they claim, £200,000 for the life of a child from 0 to 21, what happens if you are on benefits or you're a family that lives in a very deprived area who could be defined as being poor? What happens if you can't afford that £200,000 to raise your child? Does that have an impact on the child? Is the child socially excluded in some way? Will that have a psychological or sociological impact? So again, another very interesting story to people across the social sciences. Sheltered housing hit by benefit cuts. Of course, social work constantly looking at the services available to people and the impact that, say, having very poor housing has on people's lives. So social workers and people working in social and healthcare would be very interested in that story. And finally, porn sites. Why is that important? Well, the availability of porn is quite vast now thanks to the internet. And that certainly is having an impact on young people and their understanding of sexuality and relationships. So psychologists would be very interested in that. And not only that, but the porn often crosses across into criminology, where there are indecent images and areas that perhaps criminologists will be interested in, and why do people want to seek out, say, for instance, indecent images of children which are against the law. So criminology would be very interested in those stories. And if any of you are interested in the news and watch the TV channels or pick up a newspaper from time to time, you will see there are continuing themes within the media that really typify contemporary UK. Some of those issues we face are the issue of austerity and the funding of public services, and debates about whether we can carry on taking cuts to our services. The ageing population, we hear this a lot, that actually people are living longer, and that is leading to a lot of time when people are no longer working and actually perhaps relying on state benefits via the pension. And increasingly we're seeing that matched with an increase in dementia. We're also seeing a lot of stories about immigration, refugees and asylum seekers. What are our ethics around that topic? Should we let people in who are in need? Is there a limit to the number of people we should allow in our country, and so on? The impact of the media on young people, a lot of anxiety about whether young people playing violent video games or access to porn on their iPhones will have a detrimental impact on the development of young people and their ability to relate to each other. Mental health and well-being of our children, a lot of news items actually suggesting that there's increasing numbers of children suffering from eating disorders, for instance, and a not very pleasing statistic to show us that across the developed world, that children and young people in the UK are some of the less happy, let's say, amongst the developed world. And we're also seeing quite a lot of stories about the growing gap between rich and poor, and quite a few stories in the media about globalization and climate change. All of these stories are vitally important to the social sciences, and if you're interested in any of those issues, social science is massively relevant to helping us solve those problems that we face in the UK, all of those issues around poverty and global warming and so on that are very newsworthy items. Perhaps, sorry, I'm just going to jump to the other side. Have to forgive me, I think this is in the wrong order, but one of the things that perhaps is the most important in that debate is, and that joins most of those stories together, is that what we're seeing is perhaps there's either an uneven distribution of resources, or there aren't enough resources to go round. So if we're seeing poverty, we're seeing not enough services and so on, is that because we haven't got enough money, we have to pay for them, or is that because of the policies and the decisions we are making are simply rationing those kinds of services? So is the one factor that we perhaps need to think about as social sciences is there enough resources to go round? And I just want to tell you a little bit about what I mean by resources. Resources are things that can be drawn upon by individuals or nations or organisations in order to function effectively. And these can include money, stocks and shares, so wealth generated that way, natural resources, oil, water and so on, land, property, labour, and by labour I mean people doing things, consumer goods, intellectual property and so on. In other words, if you haven't got resources, and that could be as an individual, that could be as a society, that could be as a developing country, if you haven't got the resources, then you are less able to participate in the world. And with this uneven distribution of resources, there are implications that we need to think about in terms of social justice. Is it fair that some people have more than others? Is it fair that 65 people currently in the world own half of the wealth, half of the resources globally, not just in one country but across the globe? If you have some people who have not got enough resources to live, maybe live in poor housing and so on, or can't afford to eat properly, that will have an impact on their well-being and on their mental health. So there are implications there. What about political stability? If you have an increasing distance between the rich and the poor, that has been shown across time that has an impact potentially on political stability. And what about economic stability? Is it a good situation to have some people that are very, very poor who can't actually participate in society in the same way that their richer peers can? That can have an impact on economic stability. So the question of resources is vital to us understanding many of those issues that we looked at earlier that are in the media. And not only that, but environmental scientists are increasingly warning that there is a problem in terms of the depletion of resources. And therefore what we do as consumers when we go out and buy things, t-shirts, food, cars, whatever that might be, that raises issues for sustainability. So what I want to do next is make those links between debates in environmental science and in the human sciences. Because what the environmental scientists are saying is the situation at the moment where we're consuming masses of resources, particularly in the developed world, in the Western world, we cannot simply carry on consuming at that rate because resources are depleting and we're seeing climate change. So the question for social sciences is also, can we carry on consuming these resources at the rate we are now if it's having an impact on the ecology, if it's changing climates and if it's changing sea levels and so on. So when we're talking about sustainability, this has become a massively important word now in the social sciences, because it's not just about ecology, although that's a vital part of it, but it's about the habits and behaviours, the expectations, the political beliefs, the patterns of consumption that we actually enjoy at the moment. And these contribute to a present which, if the scientists are to believe, is unsustainable in the future. And therefore, as social sciences, the problem, the big problem that has emerged that we must start to look at is how can we change human behaviour, because human behaviour is inextricably linked to the environment and this issue of sustainability. This is because, it's quite simple really, it's because everything we do as humans is becoming increasingly global in nature. So I'm sat here in Bradford and I'm talking to you on this webcam, and because of that, because of the internet, this webcam can be taken across the globe. So somebody sat in Nairobi or Egypt or France or America, as well as in Halifax down the road, they can actually participate in this webinar, and that is because of the internet. That internet has opened up huge possibilities for us. We can talk to each other, we can get news from across the globe at the click of our fingers. Facebook, products like that are now global phenomenon. I don't think there are probably many people across the globe have never heard of Facebook. This is a global product, and this has an impact not just on our forms of entertainment, but how we actually interact with each other and the kind of knowledge we can gain about people from across the globe. We also know in terms of globalization that money and banking and all of those financial systems are global in nature. There is not really any business or bank that doesn't trade globally, particularly the banking system. Clothing and food is increasingly global in nature. Again, I don't think there's anywhere across the globe where people wouldn't recognize the logo or the name of Coca-Cola. Clothing, we might trip over to go to Bradford and go shopping, and I'll buy a t-shirt. And if I look at the label, I will see that the possibility is that t-shirt's been made in Bangladesh or China. So again, we're linked to communities across the globe. Somebody has made something that I am wearing thousands of miles away. Travel and movement of people. If you're lucky enough, maybe you've been on holiday this year or over the last year and you've been to somewhere across the globe. Increasingly, aeroplanes are and moving and going abroad is something that's become a common mainstream activity, and also the movement of people in terms of migration patterns and asylum seekers and refugees and so on. Another global phenomenon is terrorism. This obviously hits the news quite frequently, but terrorism has taken on a global character. There are groups now that we recognise not only because we see them in the global media, but they actually operate across borders. They do not keep within their state boundaries and so on. So all of these issues are things that social sciences are engaging with, simply because there are issues of sustainability around all of these global processes. So this is where studying the social sciences actually kicks in. In the social sciences, what we're trying to do is work to find innovative solutions to some of these global problems that actually seem sometimes on the face of it insurmountable. And we're doing this because it is more and more seen essential that we need to safeguard the world for future generations. There are many aspects of the world, as we've seen, that are simply unsustainable as they stand. So let's look at this through the different areas of social science that we offer in Bradford, so you can get a little bit more of a handle of how important globalization and sustainability are to those subject areas. Economics, for instance. Can we carry on pursuing economic growth? It's what politicians talk about all the time. We need to see economic growth. That shows a healthy economy. But is that possible? Is it possible to keep growing the economy, particularly when we've got developing countries that are also trying to achieve economic growth? And those are the debates that are going on in the economics field at the moment. And so too are the debates about international banking and global markets, and particularly in relation to developing countries. Do these systems disadvantage developing countries? Is it possible for developing countries to catch up the economies in the developed world, or are they kept in a kind of very disadvantaged relationship because of the way the banking system works? In other words, is the economic system, the global capitalist economic system, unfair? And these are debates which economists are currently debating and engaging in. Sociology. One of the big things, a big area of sociology at the moment is looking at globalization, and particularly looking at consumption. And by that I mean the things we buy, like t-shirts, like Coca-Cola, like Nike trainers. All of those are often expressions of who we are. So for instance, a teenager might say, oh, I wouldn't be seen dead in a Primark t-shirt, I've got to have a designer label. That's not because they're a warmer item, that's because it actually contributes to their identity. They want to express themselves. They want to give out a particular signal about the person they are. So sociologists are really quite keen to look at this relationship between what we buy, what we eat, and our identities. I don't know how many of you, I certainly do this, play the trolley game in the supermarket. You actually look in other people's trolleys and you can try to guess about those individuals, that family, guess about their lifestyle from their trolley. So maybe you're looking in and you're seeing pesto and you're seeing artisan bread, and that might show that family is rather middle class, whereas you might look in another trolley and you're seeing value bread or different kinds of, consumer goods. I often play that game and try and guess what the individuals might be, whether they're vegetarians and so on, because consumption is very much part of our expression of identity. How does consumption impact on global inequalities? Again, if we think back to what I said about resources, resources give us the capacity to do things, and if we haven't got those resources, then we can't do those things. So people who have very little money, who live in very deprived areas, may well find it much more difficult to feel included in the world, to be able to express their identities and so on, because they don't have the ability to consume in the same way that maybe their richer peers do. And also the pattern of consumption in terms of how consumer goods are made. That can often create global inequalities. So our expectation, for instance, that we're going to pop into a global chain, pop into a clothing store and be able to buy a cheap t-shirt. I'm trying not to mention their name. You probably know what brand I'm talking about, but you hop in and buy a t-shirt for £1. And we have an expectation that we can do that, and by buying a t-shirt for £1 we can get 10 different t-shirts in 10 colours, and we can throw them away at the end of that season and start again a few months later. Those sorts of expectations, though, have to be met by somebody being able to make a t-shirt and still be able to, and the organisation you're buying it from, still be able to make a profit, which means somewhere down the chain of production, somebody is being paid very little to make that t-shirt for us. Recently in the news, I don't know, probably about 2 years ago, there was quite a lot of media attention on Bangladesh, particularly when the factories collapsed and we realised that people making our t-shirts, allowing us to buy a t-shirt for £1 and changing it when we wanted to, was often met by terribly deprived and dangerous conditions for women working in clothing factories in Bangladesh. So again, this pattern of consumption can have an impact across the globe. It isn't just something that's happening locally where we actually buy that consumer good. And we also are concerned in sociology about how societies are linked. What do we learn from each other when we're looking on Facebook or looking on the internet and Googling particular things? What are we learning about each other? How are societies linked? Does increased transport, increased foreign travel actually change the way societies function and how they link together? So sociology is very keen to address those questions. Criminology, similarly, the link between the internet and crime has become a massive topic of concern. And questions are being asked, and it seems that there's a very positive answer to this, as has the internet made criminal activity easier? Well, certainly yes. It's certainly made particular sorts of crime easier. And are there new types of crime that we haven't seen before the internet? And words like cyberbullying, cybercrime, we're seeing these kinds of words enter our lexicon because they're now new phenomenon that have emerged thanks to the World Wide Web. And criminologists are very keen to see what impact the internet has on crime, how sometimes it's very difficult to detect criminal activity because it's hidden behind a computer somewhere and it's very hard to detect where that criminal is. Therefore, in other words, you can steal without leaving the comfort of your own home. Can we come up with solutions to prevent, for instance, prevent the sharing of indecent images of children? Can we come up with solutions to prevent international terrorism and activity that relies on communicating through the internet? So criminologists are very concerned with globalization and the impact that's had on the different patterns of criminal activity that we are now seeing. Politics and peace studies. Very keen to look at the relationship between the developed world and the developing world and to see how they're linked and whether it's possible for developing countries to actually catch up, or whether there's something about the political system that keeps those countries in a position where they are always going to be poorer and maybe unable to enjoy the kind of development and the patterns of consumption that we are able to enjoy in the developed world. Peace studies are very keen to carry out into research to try and better understand the rising global terrorist movements. to try and understand what kinds of political, social, maybe even psychological factors may actually help us understand what makes somebody join a terrorist group such as ISIS, what is actually going on there. Are there political theories that can help us understand why this global terrorist movement seems to be growing? What political solutions can we find to broker peace in war-torn areas? So we're seeing the impact. The newspapers are talking about the impact of Syrian refugees on our country, but the solution to people not leaving their country is obviously, can we find a peaceful solution so Syria does find peace, and so those people do not have to leave Syria to find a peaceful place to live. Peace studies are looking at those and have been able to come up with some sorts of political solutions to try and broker peace in those kinds of areas. So massively important work going on in politics and peace studies. Psychology, looking at the concept of identity and how, as I said before, what we consume, what we buy, what we wear, all of those kinds of things can have a deep impact on our identity. And perhaps and certainly there's been a lot of media coverage recently on the increase in eating disorders. How can we understand that as psychologists? Is there a link between the media, between adverts that are constantly showing very slim models, adverts constantly showing us how we should diet and keep slim and so on? Is the global media the reason why we're seeing an increase in eating disorders in young people in the UK? And not only an increase in numbers, but an increase in the age that the onset actually happens. So we're seeing children as young as 8, 9, 10 actually starting to develop an eating disorder because they feel too fat. Now, this is linked to the contemporary world. What aspects of that can we identify as being the root cause of those changes in the way young people are seeing themselves? And how can we safeguard the mental health and well-being of children and also the whole population if we are facing an increasingly unequal society? So psychology is doing some very important work in those areas. Social work and health and social care. Austerity has caused a great impact on people who are the most vulnerable in society. Those cuts to services have had a bigger impact on some of the elderly, on people with disabilities, on young people from poorer backgrounds. And this is something of great concern to people working in social work. And they often find themselves working in some of the most deprived areas and can actually hands-on do research to find out what the impact of those cuts are to some of those more deprived communities. And they're asking questions about, are there innovative ways we can come up with to try and meet the needs of those people when there are fewer public services? And some ideas such as co-production and user and carer involvement have been policies that have tried to overcome some of those problems that we're seeing in terms of austerity and the lack of services able to meet people's needs. Can we empower people to meet their own needs? Can we help them to actually develop new behaviours and eating patterns and so on to prevent problems before they occur and so on? So social work is doing quite a lot of research and support in that kind of area. And also we need to think about very much about the ageing population and how we respond to what the World Health Organization has called an epidemic of dementia, where we're going to see increasing numbers of people develop dementia. How do we respond to that in society? Have we got the resources to respond to that, and so on? So social work are doing quite a great deal of work in that area. So as you can see, we've looked at the news items. We've seen that the things that are coming up consistently as issues and problems and anxieties in contemporary UK society are actually areas which the social sciences are heavily committed to researching in and trying to come up with innovative solutions to challenge those problems and try and find solutions. So that's the first thing. And secondly, we've seen that sustainable societies is something that's increasingly on the agenda across the social sciences. We need to find solutions from economics right through to social work. We need to find solutions to the problem of a lack of resources and an uneven distribution of those resources, and those kinds of work are going on across the faculty. Also, I need to say that the faculty and the university at large are committed to addressing these issues. And if you've had a look at the website, and I do suggest you have a look at the university website and the pages, the web pages on the Faculty of Social Sciences, you will see that we're heavily committed to these 4 areas: excellence in research, internationalisation, actually recognising that what we do in Bradford has an impact on people across the globe and vice versa. Equality and diversity, actually recognising that, you know, perhaps we ought to think about how resources should be less uneven in their impact, and what can we do to try and enhance equality across societies. And perhaps most importantly of all of the 4 is sustainability. What can we do to try and challenge those problems that are unsustainable, those issues that cut across the social sciences that are challenging us and challenging us to find different ways of behaving as human beings, politically, economically, socially, and so on, to make society, and that can be local, global society, more sustainable. Thank you very much for listening. I'm very happy to take some questions now, so over to you. Somebody's asked me, do I think social injustice is due to increasing global inequalities? That is a very good question. I kind of think that those two are in a duality, if you like. Global inequalities can help explain social injustice, and social injustice equally can help us understand global inequalities. It's very hard to break that circle. But I think very definitely if we look at the issue of resources, then we know they are not distributed evenly across the UK society, and they're certainly not distributed evenly across the globe. We also know that in order for us to enjoy the kinds of global products that we want to enjoy in the UK, for instance, like those cheap t-shirts, that relies on somebody somewhere else working for a salary that we simply wouldn't work for, wouldn't even consider working for in the UK. So we're seeing, you know, women working in Bangladeshi factories, making those t-shirts for very, very little money, and the only way that we can make a profit in the UK is often through sending our work abroad, where working conditions are poorer and wages are poorer. And so I do think it's about us looking at the system, and it is a system that seems to be inherently unjust. So I think your question is a very good one. How does this link to the courses we are doing? Well, research is carried out all the time, and so that research gets fed into the modules and into the programs, the degree programs, because it's vitally important that as social scientists we respond to the world around us and we keep up to date with the world around us. Consequently, there's a big drive now in the faculty to enhance the content in terms of sustainability, because we now know that is one of the biggest challenges facing us as human beings across the globe in the 21st century. And so academics are working continually to ensure that you're getting involved in those debates, that you're going to be able to think about things that are really important to the world now, whatever you're doing, whether that's economics, social work, or sociology. So you're actually thinking about contemporary problems, and we are supporting you to help you think of innovative solutions to those problems. So that's how it links with the course. It's very much that the courses try and keep up to date with the debates that are going on in the outside world, but equally Bradford is leading some of those debates. So some of those debates coming from, for instance, peace studies, are actually leading global debate about terrorism, for instance. So that is how it links to the courses. Please, I hope that answers your question. Do I think the bridge between poor and rich will ever close? Will equality never exist in society, or will there always be a hierarchy? That's a very good question. I wish I had a magic wand, and I wish I could bridge the gap between rich and poor, but it may well be the way that capitalism is set up, that very much depends on there being a hierarchy. I think the problem, the issue of hierarchy is less a problem than the issue of how wide that hierarchy is. So if we have a hierarchy where there is a relatively modest gap between the richest and the poorest, that's one thing. But if we have a hierarchy where, for instance, we have a situation now where 65 people in the world own half of the world's wealth, half of the resources, then I think that is a problem. And I think we're seeing that problem, particularly as we're seeing some sections of society and some sections of the world getting poorer and poorer. Also, I think we need to think about that some of the poorer countries are the ones who are going to suffer most from global climate change. So sea level rises, problems in terms of the climate, extreme weather conditions and so on. They have a harder impact. They have a more profound impact on poorer parts of the world than the richer parts of the world. Not only because they don't have the infrastructure to actually deal with it in perhaps the same way that we do, but actually they're not actually consuming the resources in the first place that are leading to those problems. So there is a real injustice going on there. So they are suffering the most from increasing patterns of consumption, but they're less able to do anything about it because they're not actually consuming those goods themselves. So there is an issue. So I think it's a brilliant question. I'm not sure that there is ever going to be a situation where everybody is completely equal, and I'm not sure that would necessarily be a healthy thing. But I think it's the size of the hierarchy, the size of the differential between the richest and the poorest that actually is the problem, and the debate that I personally would like to get involved in. Okay, so we have a question. I live in a developing country, Indonesia, and I personally think there's still a huge gap between countries to the other countries. Do you think it's possible to close the gap in terms of economic justice and lifestyle, etc.? Yes, I do. I do think if there's a political will and we can start to think of maybe different economic systems, different ways of organising our economy and our political systems, I do think there is a possibility. We're seeing a little bit of that movement, say, in global organisations such as the United Nations, who have a remit to look at the impact of things globally and to try and come up with solutions that try and address the problems of countries across the world and not just the countries in the developed world. But it is, there are some really big issues that we're talking about here, big political debates, and there isn't necessarily agreement about how we would, say, for instance, enhance justice or bridge that gap between the richer and poorer countries. But I do think it's possible. I just think maybe what we need to start thinking about is whether there are new economic models, new models of consumption that we can develop that can actually benefit people across the globe and not just those in the richest countries. Any more? Please come back to me if you have something else you'd like to say as well. You're all very quiet now, so I think what we're saying is that there isn't an easy answer to any of these problems. That is the point. And on one level, that might seem that it's a very frustrating area to be in. It's not quite like maths, where you're adding 1 and 2 and you always get 3. It is a problem because there are different theories and there are different theorists who have developed different models about how to address some of these problems. Equally, there are political theorists, perhaps, if we look at that, and economic theorists who actually don't see a problem with the current situation. And so it is a difficult, you know, the thing with social science is that you will find is sometimes it's very frustrating, but equally it's an amazing and it's a privilege to actually be involved in thinking about things that have a real impact on people. So if we're thinking about the aging population, or we're thinking about the impact of eating disorders, or we're thinking about the difference between the richer countries and the poorer countries, to actually try and develop, come up with some sort of understanding of what the problem is and get involved in trying to design some innovative solutions to challenge those problems, to actually solve some of those issues, I think is a great privilege. And I think, I hope that it's something that you will enjoy as much as I certainly have. So somebody has asked me, where would you start resolving some of these issues? By sorting out politics or the economy, or which area would I first engage with? That is a very good question. Personally, I would start with politics because I think it's political debates that actually can frame what we think the problems are. So it may be that some people see the difference between rich and poor as being an inevitable part of human nature. Now, how you address the solution in terms of what you do with the economy or what you do with poverty will be very different from somebody who actually sees resources as belonging to us all across the globe, and therefore we shouldn't have a situation where there are some people who are benefiting from the system much more than other people. So I certainly think it's at the political end that we start to need to have some of these debates, but that doesn't mean that if you're a social worker or you're a sociologist or a psychologist or an economist that you can't feed into those debates, because the information that, say, social workers have about the impact of austerity on, say, children and young people who are living in poor areas can have a really powerful political message. And one of the ways that we can give people a voice who otherwise would not be heard is through those areas actually engaging in political debate. So personally, you can tell I'm a politics is my background. I think politics is perhaps the way, but I think the other disciplines need to feed into that debate because they will have evidence and theories that will be important to help us frame the problems and try and come up with solutions. So somebody said, once resources run out, what is the next step? I kind of want to say panic. I really don't know. I think what I would like to see is that we increasingly, politicians see that they need to start thinking in a much more long-term way. They need to be thinking not about what's happening in the next election or taking them to the next election, but longer-term solutions. And I think that is one thing that we need to start pushing for, actually, that we need to come together and forget our differences and actually design solutions across the social sciences and across the political spectrum, because some of these problems are enormous. And some of these are going to have a massive impact on the next generation. So I'm hoping those things can happen before we run out of resources, but who knows. William has asked about the delay. Is the webinar being recorded? Unfortunately, yes, because I have stumbled on my words a few times. So if you apologies if you're listening to the recording and you can hear some hesitancy, but hey ho, that proves it's a human being here and not a robot. Any more questions? Do you think the modern economic principles are increasing the exploitation of working class people? I am thinking the monopolization of many economic sectors by private corporations. Again, I have my own thoughts on that, for my own political philosophy, but I think it depends what political ideology you actually adhere to about how you would answer that question. But I think as much as I'm trying to tread on eggshells there, and not present one particular ideology, I think there is a cut-off point. And I think if we've got a situation where I keep saying this statistic, that a handful of people own most of the wealth across the world, then that is a reason to start worrying and actually think about how we, that perhaps there is a relationship of exploitation going on there. Again, I think it's massively important that we get involved in those debates as students of social sciences, that we actually get involved in those debates and think of solutions, possible solutions to understand how we can overcome some of those issues. But if there is no magic wand, and the trouble with social sciences, there are different theories, there are different ways, and people will disagree about the problem, let alone the solution to the problem. So as an individual, I agree with your question, Hirab, but as a social scientist, I'm standing back a bit and I'm thinking actually what we need to do is actually get involved in that debate and see if we can understand what the solution is, what the problem is. I think we should be careful of thinking of very simplistic solutions and thinking of these problems as simplistic, because as I've said, they are global in their reach and they involve different nations and different political systems and different ideas and identities and societies, and so it is a very complex thing to unravel, but that doesn't mean that we mustn't try. How can we change this aspect of politics? Is there a way to take self-interest out of elections and make it more representative? Well, there are debates about PR systems and actually making everybody's vote have a better chance to affect the outcome. Certainly the first past the post system in the UK has been accused of actually electing governments on a minority of the electorate, and we know that's true. But I think, again, politics is something that should happen as much from the bottom up as the top down. And I think the problem is a lot of people have become disaffected with politics and feel it's not an activity they want to get involved in, and that is part of the problem. So I think we need a rallying cry. We do need people to start getting involved and taking an interest to help us solve these problems. And so if I would change one aspect of politics, the thing I would change is to inspire people who previously haven't thought about it to actually start thinking about whether they think the current system is okay or not and what they would like to do about it. I'd like to empower people to get involved in talking about the problems and the solutions, and that, I think, would have a big impact on our politicians. If more of us got involved, they'd have to take more notice. So how would a psychologist go about tackling the increase in mental health cases in the UK? A very good question, and that's a very pertinent question given that this week, certainly the Prime Minister has been talking about increasing investment in mental health services. At the same time, mental health services themselves have said that they are at crisis point. Probably as a psychologist, a budding psychologist, you know that for whatever reason, we put mental health as a less important issue than physical health. And maybe there are reasons for that, but I if anybody's ever had a mental health issue, they will know that that can equally cause suffering and pain and prevent them from being able to participate fully in everyday life. So there is a good reason why we should be increasing our spending and our investment in trying to enhance people's mental health and well-being. As a psychologist, again, there are many things you can do. Engaging in practice, going out and working in the field and actually trying to support people who are experiencing mental health problems, but also by feeding into that debate about needing more mental health services to support us. So I think as a psychologist, hopefully we'd have quite a strong role in raising awareness. I think that's probably one of the most important things. Too often when people have mental health issues, it's attached to that is stigma, that somehow people who've got mental health issues may be dangerous, and I think there's some confusion, particularly in the media, as you see films that sort of, stigmatize people and kind of link mental health problems with maybe violence or those kinds of things. So it's sort of raising awareness that mental health is something that 1 in 4 of us will suffer at any one point in our life from poor mental health. So it's something that we need to raise awareness of and to challenge that stigma. So I think as a psychologist, that's something you could certainly contribute to. Is there an explanation for the increase of mental health issues due to the pressures of today's society, or has mental illness always been a problem but people feel it's more acceptable to talk about it in today's society due to cultural shifts and less stigma? What an amazing question. Well done for that question. I like that very much. I think both. I think you're absolutely right. I think there has been a slight shift, not enough. Still a lot of stigma attached to mental health issues. Still a lot of, research showing that people who have mental health issues who are applying for jobs are finding it much more difficult to get into the workplace because of their mental health issues, and that could be because of stigma, or that could be because they need particular things to support them and those things are not available. So there is that aspect, but I think as well, I think society is more risky, or at least it feels more risky. There is a theory in the social sciences called the risk society, that today not only are things more risky, we're facing global warming, we're facing austerity, we're facing global terrorism, we're facing massive problems that seem as an individual insurmountable to actually deal with. So there's that aspect of it, and on top of all that there are increasing pressures for young women, for instance, to be thin, and for older people not to age, and so on. So I think there are certain aspects of contemporary society, and I'm sort of talking about the Western world here, I guess, the developed world. There are certain aspects that I think are creating many more problems in terms of our mental health and well-being, and statistics are bearing that out. Particularly with a vast increase in young people experiencing mental health issues. But I think also perhaps it is more acceptable now to go to your GP or to go to your health services and say that you actually feel very low or suffering from depression and so on. And so it may be actually easier for you to do that. But what a great question. Thank you very much. Any more? Right. Do you think since the Duchess of Cambridges has grown her support in mental health and taking action, will it help parents? I mean, I think any publicity that actually raises awareness, again, it goes back to those voices. If there are people out there who have mental health issues, they often don't have a voice. They're either not able to, because of their condition, actually engage in society and join in society, or as a group they have been traditionally stigmatized and excluded. So I think anything that raises the profile of mental health and tries to provide support for increasing good mental health and well-being has got to be a good thing. I'm not necessarily particularly supportive of the royal family, but that's my personal view. But I think anybody that can raise that profile has got to be a very, very good thing. Do I think there's enough help out there for children and young people? Certainly not. Not only have I worked in social science as an academic, I've actually worked in the voluntary sector, and in particular working with children with autism. I know that the services out there for children and young people, either in terms of mental health and well-being or in terms of disability, have been cut to the quick. And there isn't enough help there. And often parent carers who have a child with some sort of mental health or problem or a disability have to fight very hard to get the services their children need. So there are definitely not enough services out there. I mean, equally not for adults either, I've got to say. Perhaps that's because we don't have enough professionals, enough people trained to actually deal. It's very specific to deal with children and young people. They do not think and have the experience maybe, or the cognitive or the vocabulary to actually talk about mental health in the way adults can. So there's very specific care needed. So perhaps there are more people that need to enter that as a profession, but equally we do need to put more resources in it. Children and young people are our future resource. They are the future resources. If they are not functioning, our future society will not function. So it's massively important that we pay attention to that. And I think in the UK we are fairly bottom of the scale. We have a lot of children and young people who have quite profound difficulties, and a lot of young people presenting with symptoms such as anxiety and eating disorders. And so as a UK society, we really need to take stock and have a look what aspects of UK society are actually leading to this increase in poor mental health and well-being. So there's plenty for you to do out there, Sarish. Plenty of research and plenty of debates you can get involved in if you're interested in that sort of area of psychology and social care. So thank you for those questions. And the bottom question, what can be done? We need more resources, that's it. More manpower, more money, more training, and we need children and young people themselves to have a voice and tell us what they need. So that's what needs to be done. Can we see radicalisation as a safeguarding issue for children? Let's think about the influence of media in the lives of young Syrians in Syria. Certainly, yes, I think it is a safeguarding issue indeed, particularly if that's information that's been passed down to children, targeted at children from adults. Yes, that's definitely a safeguarding issue indeed. And the media, well, the media is just a little bit part of that. I don't think we can blame the media entirely. I think there are reasons why maybe some of these children are much more vulnerable to those messages, and let's use that word, they're vulnerable. There's nothing innate in them that would turn them into radical individuals. They are much more vulnerable to that, and that may be because they've been excluded in other areas of their lives. It may be they've experienced quite a lot of deprivation or even violence in their lives. I don't know. Certainly we need to do research on that, but I don't think, in all honesty, we can blame just the media for that. Thank you. Good question. So we have 2 minutes more. One final question, perhaps. Excellent. I can see a couple of people are typing madly. What I've liked is here as well, we seem to have a range of people with a range of interests. So we've, so hopefully that's helped you think through the social sciences a bit more, because there are some people who are primarily concerned with the economic, political side of things, and some people much more interested in health and well-being and looking at the social side of problems in society. So it's been very, very interesting, and obviously we've got some very intelligent people the other side of this screen, because your questions have been phenomenal, so thank you for that. Okay, so unless there are any other questions, I'd like to thank you very much. And I do make a plea, especially as I can see the intensity of the questions and obviously your motivation to be here, and some of the, you know, I can see some of the thinking going on behind these questions. You're obviously motivated to try and find solutions to some of these problems, and I do hope that you find your way in the social sciences in Bradford, because we would welcome you with open arms. We're here to inspire you and to help you in your career as social scientists, but equally you're here to inspire us, and I've certainly been very inspired this evening, so thank you very much.